So maybe we can start by just doing a round of introductions. Katharina?
Oh, yes, of course. So, hi, my name is Katharina Koerner. I'm from Austria originally. I moved to the Bay Area 4 years ago. My background is a PhD in law, and since I'm here specialized in privacy engineering and then AI governance, I conducted some studies on the subject, and currently I'm with the biggest university actually in the US. Probably you haven't heard of it still. It's called Western Governors University, and I'm leading AI governance there. So I'm not teaching, I'm in tech.
Steve Wilson. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Exabeam, which is a leader in AI-driven cybersecurity operations. And last year, I started a project on AI security at the Open Worldwide Application Security Project, OWASP, which has gotten to be very popular. And this weekend, my new book on AI security went live on Amazon. That would be the developer's playbook for large language model security, if anybody wants to go check it out.
Hi, I'm Jai Kumar. A slightly technical name because it's got both AI and AR in my name. I am the head of innovation for Tata Consultancy Services. For those of you who don't know TCS, we are the top 3 SIs in the world, 46 countries and 600,000 plus employees, of which about 300,000 are AI trained now. So there's a lot of human in the loop, especially when we come to working with projects and working with enterprises. And as part of TCS, I had the Co-Innovation Network. We work primarily with startups worldwide to solve a host of our customer challenging problems. And we have about 2,800 startups in our portfolio. We don't invest in them, but rather prefer partnering with them to solve our Fortune 2000 customer challenges.
Thank you. So maybe I can start with you, Katharina. So when you talk about human augmentation versus human replacement, I think Eric said it well in terms of one is much easier to measure the ROI, it's human jobs being displaced. When you think about the work you've done around regulations and what is trying to be done in Europe and in the US, what are you learning about how those regulations are favoring one or the other or neither?
Yeah, I would say currently we're seeing also with the California Privacy Protection Agency, which wants to move forward the bill on automated decision making, that they're really struggling with defining what is automated decision making, when should it take place, when not. And when looking at all the other regulations we have already on the table, so the EU AI Act or the EU GDPR, or I would say what might be emerge as a standard in the US, so the Colorado AI Act, which will enter into force February 2026, I do not see a coherent, always the same system, more or less, where I can say, okay, this is a high-risk application, now I need to have a human in the loop. Colorado, for example, goes for human oversight in retrospect. So if you have a consequential decision that AI systems make, you can, in retrospect, as the consumer say, hey, I think that was not right, and I also have the right to opt out and be informed. So I do not see a coherent system. When should we have a human in the loop? Meaning a human involved before a decision is made, a human on the loop, what we might have in semi-autonomous vehicles, like the slides called it, I did not see the slide before, the human override, or when we have something that we might call human in control. Is that the same or different from human in the loop? I don't know, but the judge, for example, ML predictive system suggests something, judge says, yes, no, I think not. So there is no one size fits all coming from regulatory authorities as it usually is not in this field, not super clear.
Maybe Steve, could you shed some light on what you're seeing, at least in cybersecurity applications and the use of AI? And it is such a critical application that removing the human from the loop and saying, okay, here you go, the answer is 42, rarely works. But what are you seeing there?
So I think cybersecurity is interesting because it was one of the industries that adopted AI technology very early. There are a lot of 10-year-old case studies about people using machine learning to do critical in-the-loop decision-making about, understanding pattern matching for what's normal and not normal, and escalating things, or frankly, hiding them from the humans in the event that they didn't seem interesting. But what's clear is that the amount of data that the typical enterprise is collecting is going up exponentially. And so even with these low-level machine learning algorithms helping screen for things, the human teams that ultimately need to do decision-making are completely swamped. So basically the operators inside a security operations center are all swamped. There's a lot of studies. They're under stress, they're depressed. It's not been a happy place to work. And so what we've started to see get introduced this year are some much more intelligent co-pilots. And at Exabeam, we introduced a co-pilot earlier this year. It's the fastest adopted feature in the platform in the 10 years that we've had it. And the basic idea is takes the output out of some of these well-honed machine learning models. It used to be that went directly to the users, and that meant you need super experienced users to look at every output. Every log file line, there might be 50 questions you could ask. But now you can feed some of that hyperdense information to a large language model that is tuned or prompted for the job at hand. And what that's able to do is put summaries in plain English or plain Japanese or plain Spanish in front of a cybersecurity operator and make transparent what was very opaque, and then better yet, allow them to ask follow-up questions. Because the problem is there are so many entry-level employees. This is a piece of the economy that's not well staffed, so a lot of people are being trained into it. When they come in and they're new, their only recourse has been to escalate to a more senior operator. Those people get stressed the more that you escalate to them. For a lot of these escalations, they can now answer their own questions with the co-pilot. And it's created this virtuous circle where it's actually made the lower level employees more effective, and it's freed up the time of the more senior employees to actually go after the more senior things. So I don't think it's saving anybody any cost, but what it is it's actually making dramatically more secure environments, because frankly, before, a lot of the alerts and other things that should have been investigated were just getting dropped on the floor because there was no time to do it.
So I think that's, Steve, maybe just a follow-up to that. I think one of the charts that Eric Brynjolfsson showed was in customer service. And he showed that more skilled workers had less of an experienced worker skill, had less of a productivity boost than people with less tenure. And I know when you go into a SOC, you've got the Uber SOC analysts and you got the newbies, right? So what are you seeing there?
So it's interesting. I think we went into this with a very clear intent. The sort of product manager statement of intent was, can I turn a tier 1 analyst into a tier 3 analyst? So that was, the assumption was, I want to find that less experienced operator and I want to make them more experienced. And the feedback we've gotten is, you've made my operators 2 or 3x more productive. So I think that, at least the early data on that definitely pays off. What's been surprising is with the more senior operators, it's actually been really popular. And it's the opposite use case. Just happens the LLM is perfectly happy to play that role. Is that I remember one quote was very specifically from a senior operator. He said, it's like having an over-enthusiastic undergrad that I can send to go do any piece of work. And if he wants to send it off to go say, hey, find me the 10 IP addresses that have the most outbound traffic to North Korea, he literally says, find me and it comes back a second later. He would have had to go spin up a team to go do research on some of these questions. Yeah. But that's the point, is it does appear that there are at least a set of tasks that it cuts both ways. The one that was most surprising, though, was when we demoed some of this to our customer advisory board, which is actually mostly buyers, not hands-on users. So these are people at the chief information security officer or VP of IT level. They all freaked out and basically said, can I have it? And the product manager's like, what do you mean? You don't do any of this. And one of the guys got very flustered and he said, "Do you know what my job is during a crisis?" Obviously, this is a leading question, and he's very passionate about this. It's like, "Please tell us." He goes, "I am a blankety blank copy editor," and goes on to explain the fact that, you know, most of what he gets during a crisis is stuff that's half written in English by people who either have English as a second language or who spent way too much time in computer class and not enough time in English class, who are trying to explain techno jargon in the middle of a hack crisis and sending him incoherent stuff while he's got his board of directors banging on his head. And the fact that we showed this Copilot could take a bunch of that raw data and turn it into clean English, they've actually started asking for, can I have a Copilot that will take some of this super high level information and distill it for me and make it easy for me to communicate it?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so could you say a little bit, you guys are working with, you know, top Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, 2000 enterprises, right? What are you seeing in terms of the priorities for use cases between human augmentation versus, you know, human displacement? What are the priorities that are coming up?
Sure, thanks. So in our journey with our enterprise customers, we started this fairly early. I believe it was November or December of 2022. And what we see very clearly over the past year plus is we've segmented the human and the augmentation part in three categories. The first category is what we call assist, where the human does most of the work and is assisted by AI. The second part is augment, where both the humans and the AI collaborate. And the third part is what we call transform or automate, which is essentially the AI does all the work and uses the human for reference and cross-checking. So very clearly, we see these three categories, and when we go and talk to our enterprise customers, about 60 to 70% fall in the first category. There's another maybe 20 to 30 in the second one. And the automation now with agents and other new technologies is fairly picking up, and we are into that phase where we are essentially looking at replacing some of the human work with the autonomous AI.
And maybe one follow-up question to that. What are some of the use cases you're seeing in the first two categories that are emerging?
So we've pretty much, across our 13 verticals, we've done about hundreds of use cases in this. From an ROI perspective, I think we've crossed over $1 billion in terms of revenue generated from implementing both POCs as well as MVPs and products, and taking some of the applications into production. The lowest hanging fruit, of course, was customer service. And when we started the journey, the first question that we were asked is, can we replace these, 10 or 20 customer service agents with AI? And so from there, it started into, yes, you can replace them. But by the way, if you have AI as playing a role in your customer service journey and augment it with more information, then your customer service agents become smarter. And that is what essentially turned the needle for them. And so from a replacement perspective, yes, there is some level of displacement, but more and more we are seeing that AI is augmenting rather than replacing.
Got it. Thank you. Katharina, one question for you is, as you mentioned, from a regulatory perspective.
Thank you.
There's not a standard definition, right, of what's augmentation, where should regulation play, where should it not play.
It depends on the law, how we need to approach this.
So what are you seeing in terms of, is there any move towards kind of establishing standard definitions, or is it just kind of, state by state, country by country? And what do you see in terms of how that definition is evolving in terms of regulators trying to help guide?
Do you mean the definition of when human in the loop is required?
Correct.
No, because I don't, because I think even under the EU AI Act, it's not like, even under one law, it really depends on the risk, of course, that we're facing, then the complexity of the project, the business goals. So I think it depends on too many factors that I, unless someone can correct me here, would be able to say, yes, under all the laws, or even under one specific law, maybe the Colorado AI Act, we have to have a human in the loop. In this case, this is like black and white in the law. So it depends on the risk level and various other factors where you need the human, before, in the middle, afterwards, all the way through. But I wanted to add something to the customer service example, because I heard often today and also before that, you know, we should see, ideally also for the benefit of the organizations themselves, an uptake in AI applications. But I have to say, in our case, I am completely overwhelmed by ideas. You know, there's all the business units, especially with Gen AI, there are ideas left and right. So in my case, it's more like really what Eric was saying, the importance of AI strategy in define which tasks could get replaced for which, catering to which KPIs of the organization. So this is really something we also pursue with customer, in our case, student support. We have a lot of like mentors, tutors, etc. And we now bundle all the models that we already have on the drop rates of the students, of the non-completion rates, of the various models that are already processing student data, and feed this into an overall decision intelligence that would in real time give the support person info about this specific student and how to intervene, and then also track all the interventions over time and tell us which interventions make most sense. So I completely agree that this is one excellent use case.
Maybe I can open it to questions for the audience. Only limited time.
Quick question on cybersecurity, super interesting. Just kind of digging into the making the level 1s into level 3s. So obviously great for summarization. Did you guys have to do any training for the level 1s to have them kind of self-check the work? Because obviously there's, you know, occasional hallucinations, et cetera. Anything around how to make sure that the tool is doing what it's supposed to be doing so you don't get false positives, false negatives?
So I think one of the advantages that we had in how we approached this is we didn't approach it as a Gen AI problem. We'd been developing these machine learning models that were targeted at understanding various things for 10 years and offering a lot of explainability where you're able to kind of click through one of the recommendations and see the underlying model, where if it's recommending that you need to investigate something because Katharina logged in from somewhere strange, you can click through to that to see, well, where does she usually log in from, for example, right? And so that framework was already there. But I think one of the things you see in some of these cybersecurity products, and I think in general, is people have tried to attack some very broad use cases. And so you see things called cybersecurity co-pilots that are trying to attract very broad things, like it's trying to be a cybersecurity analyst. The feedback on these is very mixed, and there is a lot of hallucination, and they can be slow and expensive. We went after a very small set of use cases where we had pre-digested data that we can feed the LLM. So we did very little training. It's about prompting. It's about very focused, very aggressive retrieval augmented generation, and basically creating conversations that are tailor-made for a use case, so the actual hallucination is really, really low.
Other questions?
So we're seeing some use cases with LLMs, but where do you think this is heading towards? Because we're discussing agentic behavior, but do you see that coming into cybersecurity, or like with enterprise customers you're working with, or in the regulatory aspect?
I'll do a quick answer and then we'll pass it around to everybody. But I think I've been very comfortable right now with a co-pilot model. But very quickly we're getting asked, like, hey, when you make this recommendation, you seem to be right often enough. Can I give you authorization to do some of these things on your own? And at that point, it's transitioned from being a co-pilot to being an active agent. And I think what we're going to see is those are not hard lines. Those are continuums about how much autonomy and how much agency you're willing to give these things. So I think we're going to see those lines start to cross pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. In terms of our interaction, a lot of our customers are now also focusing on the small language models, where very specific tasks are taken, the data for those tasks, and essentially saying that instead of spending a lot on the large language models, can we focus it on different business verticals within the organization? So that is one trend that we are seeing fairly across the board for our customers.
Oh, no, I have nothing to add.
Other questions?
Just taking from what you were saying, Jay, this is good perspective from the enterprises, but from a startup perspective, you said you've got 2,800 companies that work with you. What counsel can you give startups looking to bring products to market that fall in the high priority tasks? Otherwise, you run the risk of coming out with products that nobody will buy because it's not high enough on the priority, and that leads to the graveyard.
Yeah, I mean, that's a case with every startup pretty much, right? You know, where do you pivot, when do you pivot? And over the last couple of years, or maybe 2 years plus, 3 years plus, we've seen almost all of them pivot towards the AI model. And when we look at use cases from the enterprise, in many cases, some of the problems that an enterprise cannot solve by themselves, and that's where our task is to essentially identify those core challenges, those core problems, and then see which startup is the most suited to address those problems. And so we have about 14 different revenue models of working with startups. And that could include just a direct licensing model and all the way up to co-innovating with them, building joint products and so on. So again, it depends on what kind of problems you're looking at, and which startup can potentially solve those problems is where we come in. And we have contextual knowledge because we've been working with some of these customers for the last 20, 25 years. You're looking at the larger banks, you're looking at the insurance companies, you're looking at retail. These are all customers that have been with us for a lot of time. And in most of the cases, our own internal architects have contextual knowledge. So we are best suited even more than the organizations themselves to understand the business value proposition and what the startup brings to the table.
Maybe one thing to add to that is I think the number one issue for startups in this space is POC purgatory, right? The POC is going on forever, nothing's coming out, there's not translating to anything real. I think going back to what Eric said, the notion of having an ROI-driven focus has got to be number one for startups. If they don't go there, almost all AI sales is going to be ROI-driven. It's going to be very hard for any startup that doesn't go there. So this goes back, we'll cover this in the discussion later on the investor panel. If a startup hasn't figured out what the ROI is and there's not a good ROI-based sell, it's going to be very, very hard to drive adoption.
I'll just add one thing is it does feel like there's an asymmetry here that may be a bit different than some of the previous iterations we've had with these technology disruptions. Is in most of those it's been really possible for the small guy to come just break through and do something revolutionary. I do think there are a lot of these startups that are getting seed level funding and A-series funding who will very quickly do something and get snatched up, and the founders will make some good money and their early investors will. But the platforms that get built are going to get built on data. And what that means is the incumbents have an unfair advantage that didn't matter as much in some of these previous, when we all went to cell phones, it didn't matter that somebody had a bigger database. It's like it doesn't fit on the cell phone, so it doesn't matter. These AI apps, the ones that have the massive amounts of data to sift through and attach to, it really is a big unfair advantage. And so I think that's one of the things with startups is that if we look at, what are going to be the platforms, and I'm going to sound super dated, but, who's building the next J2EE for AI and things like that? It's not the kind of thing that's going to come out of a lab. There's going to be... These are big games for people with deep pockets and deep databases.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add that in a case like ours, like EdTech, I mean, every university wants to create content, for example. There are multifaceted thing, how many different content types they can produce, like assessments and then controlling them and curricula and courses, etc., etc. And just this week, the product development team of my organization proposed a pilot for 8 different AI use cases, how AI would help them generate more content. And if you would, of course, specialize in that, I mean, every university needs that, and hardly any universities, I guess, have such a sophisticated machine learning engineering team as we have. And even they are struggling because, you know, that's the thing with the strategy, that the product strategy is not coordinating perfectly well. But I mean, if you solve this for us, you can solve it for everybody.
Maybe one last thing to add to that. I think you can think about AI startups in 2 categories. One is AI services companies that are delivering an outcome, or AI toolkit companies that are selling tools. I think the first will have a lot greater chance of success because fundamentally they're solving a business problem where the enterprise doesn't have to hire 10 AI engineers to figure this stuff out. And they're getting an outcome. And I think you're going to see a very different shift of types of companies that come out in the startup landscape.
And just the last word here is that we are seeing fundamentally a lot of the hyperscalers and cloud companies are kind of stepping into where the startups are coming in. And so when you look at what startups are building today, they are typically point solutions, and then they scale to a larger value proposition. And what we are also seeing is that most of the hyperscalers come in and say, you know, if we give them a problem, they say, yes, we can do it. We really don't need X or Y startup. So that is another trend that we are seeing. And internally, also within the hyperscale organizations, they are building their own toolkits, they are building their own picks and shovels, they're building their own service level plays, which in some form or the other would definitely have an impact on startups trying to penetrate the enterprise.
All right, I want to go back to what you just said and be a little bit provocative, although I understand and I don't disagree with you. I'm sorry. I thought I had a loud voice, or at least that's what I've been told. You know, startups, tool versus application, if I may call it that way, right? The applicability use case. Agree that the use case gives proof, right? KPI and benefits. But how do you scale? Because the problem of startups is not doing successful pilots, it's doing actually selling products, selling tons of products. And in that scenario, the tools are a lot easier to sell, a lot more replicable, right? As opposed to use cases that require, you know, special data, knowledge of the industry, knowledge of the company, knowledge of the problem, and how do you scale that business?
I think you're absolutely right, Sebastiano. I think the AI services type of applicant type of companies will probably do a lot better in laggard industries where they don't have the skill set to do it themselves. Think about construction, you know. But if you go to like, you know, large, you know, like go to Goldman Sachs, or you go to, you know, some of these larger institutions, like you go to Salesforce, these guys can build it themselves. And they're going to opt not for the services. So I think our belief is that a lot of these laggard industries where these AI services are going to play out. Good. I think that's very good. There's no other questions. We're going to basically move to a break. You have a question, Yash? We're going to move to a break. We'd love, you know, we've got a lot of open space out here. If you guys want to just hang around, grab some tea or coffee, and we'll take a 15-minute break and then get to our next panel discussion. Thank you.